Last summer, I released my first commercial Steam game that I made completely solo, and I figure it's about time to start my next project. But making games by yourself can be extremely difficult. It feels like there's too much to learn, you don't have enough time, or you won't make any money anyway, and it just gets really demoralizing. So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how you, as a solo, inexperienced game dev, can not only make a game totally alone, but also set yourself up for success so that you can quickly become a true game developer. And you may have noticed that my setup is, well, non-existent. That's because I just moved to a totally new city and I actually have a new job starting next week, so bear with me with the quality for now. But it also means that I only have 1 week to get this whole process done for my game. So to do this, we're going to be going through the exact process to get your game started as efficiently and stress-free as possible. In the last video, I talked about how my next game is going to be a horror game about a new pope who has to purge the Vatican of invading demons. Now, I know I love this idea, which is a great early motivator, but it also causes a huge problem that a lot of new indies run into all the time. People can go weeks or months working on their game, too anxious to show it to anyone or just not having anything interesting to show, so no one ends up knowing that you're even working on it, and this inevitably leads to disaster. Because as you and I both know, that early motivation only lasts for so long. So the guys who are sharing their games on Twitter, for example, definitely have the right idea. But it's not just because you need people to keep you accountable, though that is a huge benefit. It's primarily because you need to know as soon as possible if your game is going in the right direction. Now let's talk about exactly how you can use this to your advantage, even if your game looks like trash early on. First off, you can spend some time just getting a few followers, nothing crazy. Consider starting to engage with people. Comment on their games, support them, follow them, then start to post images or GIFs of your game or what you're working on using relevant hashtags. And then, this is the most important part, keep track of any moderately significant user that likes or retweets your posts. If you don't like the sound of that, I totally get it, but if you don't want to end up spending tons of precious time on your game, only to end up restarting it again, you need to start refining your game using the feedback, or lack thereof, that you get online. So for myself, I know if I try posting GIFs of an empty game engine screen and just say, hey, look, I got my player working, no one's gonna care about that. So what I'm gonna do, and what you should do as well, is instead of sharing your actual game, I'll be showcasing an imaginary, idealized version of it and see if people bite. So rather than focusing on getting the basics of my game done right away, I instead focused on making the coolest, most visually interesting aspects of my idea first, without really worrying about whether the code is functional or not. I actually did this for my last game. The code for the AI wasn't done yet when I made the trailer, so I just had him playing his animations automatically on loop. But now we come to a rather obvious predicament, which is that this whole thing was supposed to be easy and stress-free. What if you're just not good at art or animation or anything in game dev that appeals to people? Okay, I may have exaggerated that it's stress-free, but the best way to approach game dev is to just treat the whole thing like a big game. Imagine, if you will, a new Minecraft player on his first journey to the Nether. While looking for the fortress, he gets chased by piglins, falls into lava, and dies. The second time, he realizes that he was too reckless, brings the right equipment, and tries again. Now, this experience is ironically easier to cope with if you don't bring your best gear for the first time, only to lose it all in the lava. Which is just like game dev, because if you start off by making super simple games that you don't care about, it'll be a much more palatable experience to watch them burn. Oh, and you don't have to worry so much about Twitter when you're doing these small games, but it's always good to practice. Now, back to the question. How do you actually make a game alone if you're not good at any of those aspects of making games that we talked about earlier? Well, as you make those smaller games, you can then go back and think about what your favorite thing to do was and what you hated the most. The more you zero in on that, the higher your chances will be of succeeding as a solo game developer. A few ways to do this are, if you hate creating levels, take a few days to learn about procedural generation. Or if you hate programming, use visual scripting like Playmaker. Or if you hate art, learn the basics of color theory, geometric shapes, and lean hard into game feel or crunch elements like sound effects, squash and stretch, particle effects, and screen shape. Before moving on to the third tip, if you want to learn more about this, I just put up a complete guide on finding your forte on my Patreon, and if my work has helped you in any way, having just moved, if you choose to support me on there, I would appreciate it immensely. You'll also get access to tons of game dev resources, exclusive content, and invaluable exercises. Alternatively, you can get my free indie game dev starter guide in the description. So you're starting to understand if your game idea is any good, if it's appealing to people. Now it's time to move on to the next stage, which is the prototyping stage, where you start piecing everything together. People say that the first draft of anything always sucks. I think that's a quote or something, and it's very true. So for game dev, that means to be efficient and to not waste your time on a bad version of your game. You have to nail down a fun core gameplay loop as soon as possible. So how on earth do we do that quickly? Andre from the future here. That section of the video turned out to be really boring, so I'm actually just going to show you guys exactly what I would do in a specific example. So one of the abilities that the player can do is use holy water on enemies, and I was trying to figure out what would be the most fun way to do that. And one thing I thought of is you just click and he just throws the holy water. Another idea that I had was you hold right click and you will actually see the arc that the holy water will travel, and then you click to actually throw it. So I'd have to make both and compare them. I also did a lot of tweaking of the actual effect, the actual cone, and how that feels. But it's not limited to just that. You also want to ask yourself, should he even have this ability? Should he have like maybe just a sword instead? Would that be more fun? Ask yourself as many questions as you can. On the flip side, as important as prototyping is, if you're not very experienced, don't get caught up in analysis paralysis. If you can't prototype your game in 1 or 2 weeks at most, maybe just make a few more small games first. With what we've covered so far, you're well on your way to starting out with a strong foundation. But even with a fantastic start, the road to actually finishing your game can be super daunting, with plenty of opportunities to lose motivation and give up along the way. To make sure that doesn't happen and that you spearhead your game to success, watch this video next so that you can use the same strategies that the best game dev experts use to make a huge splash with their projects. And I also get haunted by 3 game dev ghosts, so you don't want to miss that. Thanks so much for watching, and God bless.